When the President of the United States first said out loud the words about a possible purchase of Greenland, the world reacted with laughter. It sounded like a strange joke, like yet another eccentric remark by Donald Trump that had no real basis. But the more details surfaced, the more obvious it became. This was not a joke at all. Greenland is not just an island. It is the largest land territory on the planet that is not an independent state. A space that is 6 times larger than Germany, and at the same time is inhabited by fewer than 60,000 people. And it is precisely this land that suddenly ends up at the center of attention of the largest world powers. Trump never made spontaneous statements just like that. Behind each of his loud declarations stood money, control, and strategic calculation. In the case of Greenland, all of it at once. The Arctic is changing rapidly. Ice shields are melting, shipping routes are opening, and what 20 years ago was considered inaccessible is today becoming an object of struggle. The Arctic Ocean is turning into a new arena of global rivalry. Control over Greenland means control over the North Atlantic and the Arctic. For the United States, this is a question of military and political influence. For decades, there has already been an American military base here, Thule, a key element of the early warning system for missile launches. To lose control over this region for Washington means to allow Russia and China to strengthen in the Arctic. But geopolitics is only one side of this story. Under the ice of Greenland, there are resources hidden that in the coming decades may become more expensive than oil. Rare earth metals, lithium, uranium, gold, everything without which modern technologies, green energy, electric cars, and the defense industry are impossible. Today, almost the entire global market of rare earth elements is controlled by China. For the United States, this is a strategic vulnerability, and Greenland in this context looks like an ideal solution to the problem. The faster the glaciers melt, the more deposits become accessible for development. That is why interest in the island is growing not among tourists, but among investors, corporations, and military analysts. Formally, Greenland belongs to Denmark, but in practice, Copenhagen finds it more and more difficult to maintain control over such an enormous and remote region. The island's economy directly depends on Danish subsidies. Every year, Greenland receives hundreds of millions of euros in financial assistance. However, together with money comes dependence. And more Greenlanders ask themselves the question, is a real future possible without external governance? And it is at this moment that Donald Trump appears on the scene, offering an alternative. Not independence, but a new center of power. Only quite recently, Greenland was almost not mentioned in world news. This island was perceived as a distant, autonomous territory, living its own slow life. But geopolitics knows no voids. As soon as the Arctic began to melt, attention to the north sharply increased. Climate change opened new sea routes. The northern sea route, until recently accessible only a few months a year, is gradually turning into a full-fledged alternative to traditional trade routes. For the world economy, this means a reduction of distances, time, and costs. And for states, the necessity to control these routes. Greenland is located exactly where the interests of the largest powers converge. Whoever controls this island gains the ability to influence the movement of military and civilian ships between Europe, North America, and the Arctic. For the United States, this is a question of strategic superiority, not abstract diplomacy. The American presence in Greenland is not news. The Thule military base has been operating here for decades already and is part of the system of early detection of missile launches. This is one of the key elements of the global defense of the United States. However, in conditions of growing tension between world powers, the significance of this base only increases. Russia is actively building up its military presence in the Arctic. China is investing in infrastructure projects and scientific stations, gradually entrenching itself in the region. For Washington, losing influence in Greenland would mean a strategic failure. That is why the idea of direct control over the island, even if it sounds radical, fits into the logic of American foreign policy. Trump merely said out loud what in military and analytical circles had been discussed for a long time, but not publicly. But if military arguments can be discussed behind closed doors, economic interests are harder to hide. Greenland possesses some of the largest reserves of rare earth metals in the world. This is raw material, without which modern technologies are impossible. Smartphones, satellites, electric cars, navigation systems, and weapons of the new generation. Today, the United States is critically dependent on the import of rare earth elements, a significant part of which comes from China. In conditions of trade wars and sanctions, this becomes a vulnerability of national scale. Greenland, in this system of coordinates, looks like an ideal answer to a strategic problem. Besides rare earth metals, there are deposits of lithium, uranium, gold, and other minerals here. As the ice melts, access to these resources becomes easier and easier, and the economic value of the island grows with each year. For the Greenlanders themselves, this situation looks different. Formally, the island has broad autonomy, but the economy still depends on financial assistance from Denmark. Annual subsidies make up a significant part of the budget and ensure the functioning of the social sphere, education, and medicine. The idea of independence is popular among the population, but in practice it runs into harsh limitations. Fishing remains the main source of income, however it is not capable of ensuring economic self-sufficiency. Tourism is growing, but the seasonal nature and remoteness of the region do not allow one to count on rapid growth. The extraction of minerals could become a solution, but it requires enormous investments, infrastructure, and qualified personnel. All of this is impossible without the participation of external players, and it is precisely here that the main paradox arises. To become independent, Greenland needs to become even more deeply involved in the global economy. Trump's proposal, many Greenlanders perceived as a threat of repeating history. Danish colonization already deprived the Inuit of a significant part of their independence and cultural identity. The idea of changing one dependence for another causes sharp rejection. Protests against American claims became a symbol of the desire to preserve their own path of development. People here speak directly. We want to be Greenlanders, not Americans or Danes. But at the same time, they understand that it is impossible to completely close themselves off from the world. This internal conflict becomes the key factor of the future of the island. When people talk about the struggle for Greenland, most often they recall the United States and Denmark. But behind the scenes of this story, there is one more player, about whom they prefer to speak more quietly: China. Formally, Beijing does not lay claim to the territory of the island and does not make loud statements. But it is precisely China that over the last years has been actively investing in Arctic projects, infrastructure, and the extraction of minerals. For it, the Arctic is not just a region, but a future economic corridor. Chinese companies have already shown interest in the construction of airports in Greenland, in the development of deposits, and in participation in mining projects. For Beijing, this is an opportunity to gain access to rare earth metals without intermediaries, and to reduce dependence on sea routes controlled by other powers. It is precisely the Chinese factor that in many ways increased anxiety in Washington. The loss of Greenland would mean not simply the strengthening of a competitor, but a strategic defeat in the long-term struggle for resources and influence. Behind loud geopolitical statements, the main thing is often lost: people. Fewer than 60,000 people live in Greenland. This is one of the most sparsely populated places on Earth, and it is precisely demography that becomes one of the key problems of the future of the island. Many young Greenlanders leave to study and work abroad, to Denmark, Iceland, other countries of Europe. Some of them do not return. On the island, there is a shortage of doctors, teachers, engineers, and specialists, without whom it is impossible to build a full-fledged independent state. Social problems remain a painful topic. A high level of alcoholism, depression, and suicides, especially among the young, is the shadow side of Greenlandic reality, and no mineral wealth by itself will solve these issues. For the indigenous inhabitants of Greenland, independence is not only economy and politics, it is a question of preserving identity. Inuit culture was formed for centuries in the extreme conditions of the Arctic. Fishing, hunting, dog sleds, life in a close connection with nature. All of this is not exoticism, but the basis of existence. The colonial period seriously changed this way of life. With the arrival of the Danish administration, the traditional way of life began to give way to the Western model of consumption. Together with conveniences came dependence on goods, money, and decisions made far beyond the island. Many Greenlanders fear that American influence will accelerate this process. Fast investments, a massive inflow of capital, and infrastructure projects can bring money, but at the same time finally blur the cultural foundation of society. Legally, the idea of buying Greenland looks absurd. Territories are no longer sold as in the 19th century. International law, the sovereignty of peoples, and modern political norms make such a deal impossible. But in reality, control does not always mean formal ownership. Economic dependence, military presence, and influence on key industries can give a much greater effect than legal annexation. And it is precisely this scenario that seems the most likely. The United States does not necessarily have to buy Greenland. It is enough to strengthen its influence through investments, security, and strategic partnership, gradually pushing out other players. Today, Greenland stands at a crossroads. On one side, historical dependence on Denmark. On the other, the growing interest of the United States, China, and other powers. Between them, the desire of the Greenlanders themselves to determine their own path. Independence remains a dream, but its price is too high. Full autonomy requires not only resources, but also strong institutions, personnel, and a stable economy. While this does not exist, any external proposals will look simultaneously like both a chance and a threat. Perhaps in the coming years, Greenland will still not become an independent state. But absolutely certainly one thing. This island will no longer remain in the shadow. Its resources, geographic position, and strategic significance have already made it part of a global game. The history of Greenland is the history of a world that is changing faster than we manage to get used to it. Melting ice, the struggle for resources, new routes, and the old logic of force are returning to international politics. The question is no longer why Trump needs Greenland. The question is who, in the end, will determine its future, the major powers or the inhabitants of the island themselves. The answer to it has not yet been found. And that is precisely why Greenland today is not simply a point on the map, but a mirror of global processes that shape the future of the whole world. In the 21st century, wars begin less and less often because of ideologies and more often because of resources. Oil gives way to rare earth metals, and warmth to cold. Ice, which for centuries was considered Greenland's curse, today is turning into its main asset. While glaciers melt, the price of the island grows, and the faster the climate changes, the less time remains for the Greenlanders to decide their fate themselves. The world no longer looks at Greenland as a distant edge. Now it is a strategic node for which the most influential states on the planet are ready to fight. The purchase of the island was only a loud formulation. In reality, it is about control over resources, routes, future technologies, and the military balance. In this game, it is not necessary to own territory in order to manage it. It is enough to be present at the right moment and invest where tomorrow there will be profit and power. For Greenland, this means a choice without an ideal solution: to remain dependent on Denmark, to open itself to American influence, or to try to build independence in a world where the weak are not given time for mistakes. Each of these paths carries risks, and each can change the island forever. The most disturbing question sounds not in politicians' offices and not at negotiations. It sounds more quietly in the homes of ordinary people. Will Greenland have time to become the mistress of its own land before the ice disappears completely? History already knows the answer to similar questions. Those who waited too long often woke up in a world where decisions had been made for them. And perhaps Greenland's main wealth is not gold and not rare earth metals, but time, which is rapidly melting. And if one day this island ceases to be simply the largest icy desert on the planet, there will be only one question. Who turned out to be faster, the ice or the people?